I'm a father. I have two boys, aged 8 and 11. If you've seen some of my other videos, you've seen them make cameo appearances in a few of them. And one of the traditions we have in our house is reading a book aloud every night, chapter by chapter. This started with the Harry Potter books, which we're spacing out. We're up to number 4 now in the series, but we've also read The Chronicles of Narnia, and some Jules Verne, and some Shakespeare, and a few other things. But the one that we just finished last night was Neil Gaiman's The Graveyard Book. Now, this book won both the Hugo and the Newbery Awards in 2009, which means it's a pretty special book, and I don't need to spend a lot of time telling you it's amazing and you should read it. It's sort of Neil Gaiman's retelling of Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book. Instead of being about a boy named Mowgli raised in the jungle by animals, it's about a boy named Nobody Owens raised in a graveyard by ghosts. Like The Jungle Book, it's composed of short stories which stand on their own, but which also form a whole novel, which are one piece together. Gaiman, in my estimation, is one of our greatest living storytellers. His books are often classed as, like, urban fantasy or modern dark fantasy, crossing maybe over into horror. They definitely draw on a lot of dark themes and creepy ideas. I mean, this book takes place in a graveyard. It's full of ghosts and ghouls and murderers. But these dark themes aren't at odds with it being a good book for children. It's a book about childhood. They're actually sort of the key to it. Gaiman understands that childhood is actually full of creepy, dark things, scary monsters under the bed, things which are frightening, and that dealing with fear in stories is an important thing for children to do, for adults to do too, if we're honest about it. My younger son this past week just read the graphic novel version of Shakespeare's Hamlet, and when he finished it, one of the things he said was, it was an exciting story because in most stories, everybody lives and all the problems get solved, but in this one, everybody died and a lot of things went wrong. Stories can be a place where we sort of deal with things that are hard to deal with in real life. At the back of this book, the version that I have, the acceptance speech that Gaiman gave when he received the Newbery Award is included, and in that he talks about stories sometimes functioning the way that maybe a medieval poisoner might use small doses of poison to slowly build up a tolerance, a resistance to poison, until they become effectively immune to things. Whereas if they took a big dose of the poison all at once, it would kill them, but because they take smaller doses over time, they build up a resistance, they build up an immunity to it, basically like a vaccine, a vaccination. Stories can function like that they give us an ability to cope with things that are pretty hard to cope with in real life. When we finished this book last night, my family had to take about an hour afterwards just to sit on the couch and bawl and hold each other. It's not that it was precisely a sad ending, it was more of a bittersweet ending, and I'm not going to spoil precisely what happens, but yeah, this book made us cope with some things that are difficult to cope with in real life, and gave us an opportunity to cry about things that we needed to cry about. And that speech again that Gaiman gave when he received the Newbery, he writes, "I saw clearly for the first time what I was writing. I'd set out to write a book about childhood. It was Baud's childhood, and it was in a graveyard, but still, it was a childhood like any other. I was now writing about being a parent, and the fundamental, most comical tragedy of parenthood, that if you do your job properly, if you as a parent raise your children well, they won't need you anymore. If you did it properly, they go away, and they have lives, and they have families, and they have futures. I sat at the bottom of the garden and I wrote the last page of my book, and I knew that I had written a book that was better than the one I had set out to write, possibly a book better than I am. We who make stories know that we tell lies for a living, but they are good lies that say true things, and we owe it to our readers to build them as best we can, because somewhere out there is someone who needs that story, someone who will grow up with a different landscape, who without that story will be a different person, and who with that story may have hope, or wisdom, or kindness, or comfort. And that is why we write." If you are a parent, I highly recommend reading to your kids, and when you do, make sure that you read them stories that are full of ghosts and ghouls and murderers and hard truths and things that help them to cope with some of the challenges that life will throw our way. And if you're not a parent, then take this opportunity to read those kinds of stories to yourself. We all need monsters and myths and legends to figure out who we are. We all need to visit graveyards to try to understand life.